In a little more than 10 years, one man would rise up through the ranks from obscurity to become one of the most powerful men in all of Europe. He played a crucial role in some of the most violent and tumultuous periods in human history, and his actions would continue to define the world for many years after his death, even today. Before we judge the man based on what he did and the consequences of his actions, it is important to understand his history first. The French Revolution was inspired by a period known as the Enlightenment. The ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity were born from the chaos and violence that ensued. But while the ordinary people of the revolution wanted real change under these new ideas, many factions fighting for control would ultimately replace the absolute ruler they sought to depose with, well, another absolute ruler. One man, Maximilien Robespierre, would install a reign of terror across France to protect the revolution at all costs. This would set about extensive measures to secure the new republic, including the execution of anyone who opposed it. The King of France, Louis XVI, and his wife, Marie Antoinette, were no exception. The French Revolution and subsequent execution of the French sovereign king would disgust the monarchies of Europe. Outraged, they declared war on the young republic, threatening all the gains made by the revolution. A Corsican called Napoleon would quickly rise through the ranks and eventually become master of France. However, although nicknamed the Little Corporal, he was actually average height. The myth in popular culture that he was short came from British propaganda at the time. The nickname was one of affection, given to Napoleon by the men that served under him. Napoleon spent his entire professional life in the French military, excelling from an early age. Napoleon would quickly rise to the ranks, playing key roles in major battles during the early days of the Republic. By the young age of 24, Napoleon was promoted to the rank of brigadier general and given command of the French army in Italy. Napoleon met his first wife, Josephine, in 1796. She was a widow with 2 children and would eventually agree to marriage. She was renowned for her great beauty and also by her numerous love affairs. Just 2 days after marrying Josephine, Napoleon would move on the offensive against both Sardinia and Austria, spectacularly separating and defeating their armies. Napoleon returned to France as a hero. War was continued only at sea against Great Britain. The Royal Navy was vastly superior to the French. Before France could achieve a mainland invasion of the British Isles, the threat of the Royal Navy would first need to be dealt with. Napoleon set sail with an entire army to occupy Egypt in 1798. The French hoped to deny Great Britain access to its territories in India. Napoleon brought over Western institutions and scholars with him to Egypt. However, they would soon overstay their welcome due to their decadence and drunkenness. Also, the looting of some of Egypt's most precious historical amenities probably didn't tide over well with the locals as well. Unfortunately for the French, a new series of setbacks would occur. Napoleon would suffer significant defeats in Egypt at the hands of the British, who had formed a new alliance with Austria, Turkey, and Russia. The Royal Navy successfully sunk a French squadron off the coast of Egypt. To add further insult to injury, the French army in Italy was also defeated. Under threat of invasion, political unrest ensued in France, and a radical group regarded as Jacobins seized control and expelled all moderates from government. Napoleon, already an influential figure in French society, abandoned his men in Egypt and hastily set sail back to Paris to save the Republic and take advantage of the current events to further his own political rank. Upon his arrival, Napoleon conspired to form the Consulate, effectively making himself the dictator of France. With his new grip on power, Napoleon marched his army across the Great St. Bernard Pass to completely outflank the Austrian army in Italy. After a series of French victories, the Austrians signed a new treaty restoring the ancient frontiers of France to the natural boundaries of the Alps, Pyrenees, and Rhine. Eventually, Britain would make peace with France, and for the first time in a while, there was peace in Europe. But peace would not last. Britain declared war on France again because of treaty violations. Great Britain, deeply disturbed by the events and changes following the French Revolution, feared the growing strength of France in Europe. They routinely conspired with royalists in France by financing and encouraging revolts against Napoleon. A British-backed plot to assassinate Napoleon was uncovered in 1804. To further consolidate his power and protect his regime, Napoleon announced that he would transform the consulate into a hereditary empire. Regime change by assassination would be removed due to the existence of an heir. This revived many old institutions and gave Napoleon the authority to rule under God, validating his new dynasty. Great Britain would continue to wage war against France, dealing a decisive blow at the Battle of Trafalgar, which saw the French fleet completely destroyed. The British also forged a new alliance with Sweden, Russia, and the Kingdom Naples. Napoleon redirected his grand army that he had amassed for the invasion of the British Isles and defeated the Austrians at Ulm. He then occupied Vienna before marching on to his most famous victory at the Battle of Austerlitz, defeating the combined armies of Austria and Russia. Spectacularly defeated once again by Napoleon, the Austrians would sign another treaty with the French, this time ceding vast swaths of territory and influence over Germany, Italy, and Holland. Prussia later entered the alliance against France, but was promptly defeated shortly after. Russia would continue to fight Napoleon in Europe, but would soon grow tired of their alliance with the British. The two emperors of the French and Russian empires would meet on a raft on the Neman River in 1807 and make peace. The two would fraternize with each other, with Napoleon even thinking he made a friend out of the Tsar. Napoleon's only hope at defeating the British was through economic dominance. He orchestrated a continental blockade of Britain and ordered all goods from her and her colonies to be seized. Portugal, an old ally of Great Britain, refused and continued to trade with the British. In response, Napoleon declared war on Portugal and sent his grand army via Spain to occupy Lisbon. Napoleon would go on to occupy the whole Iberian Peninsula and install his brother as the King of Spain. Huge revolts took place as the Spanish people rejected his brother as their new ruler. Napoleon was close to ending the revolts in Spain when for the fourth time the Austrians declared war on France in the hope of rallying the German kingdoms against her. They failed, and yet another treaty was signed ceding more kingdoms to France. Napoleon remarried in 1810 after his first wife, Josephine, failed to produce an heir. The French Empire would be at its height during this time. Peace with Austria seemed guaranteed with the marriage of Napoleon to Marie-Louise, the daughter of the Austrian Emperor Francis I. However, Napoleon would struggle to keep Russia as a proactive partner, and relations between them would strain before reaching a climax with Napoleon invading Russia in 1812. Napoleon assembled 600,000 men for the invasion of Russia. However, to the detriment of Napoleon, the Russians refused to engage him on open ground, denying him the decisive victory he needed. As the Russians retreated, they adopted a scorched earth policy, putting enormous strains on Napoleon's supply lines as he invaded deeper and deeper into Russian territory. The Russians would eventually turn and fight Napoleon at Borodino. However, the grueling battle for both sides proved indecisive. Napoleon and his grand army would enter Moscow only to find the city completely abandoned and mostly in flames. With the Russian winter falling on his army, Napoleon was forced to embark on a disastrous retreat back to France. Out of the 600,000 men that Napoleon brought to Russia, only 10,000 would be in fighting shape when he finally returned. A new alliance consisting of Russia, Great Britain, Austria, and Prussia soon invaded France from all sides. Despite his best efforts, Napoleon was unable to fight against the insurmountable odds. After the capitulation of Paris, Napoleon was forced to abdicate from the French throne. The victorious allies exiled Napoleon to the small Mediterranean island of Elba and installed a puppet king to rule France. At first, Napoleon accepted his new role as emperor of the tiny island, introducing similar social reforms there as he had with France and her vassal states. However, Napoleon would soon grow bored of playing emperor and closely monitored the deteriorating situation the new puppet king of France found himself in. Seeing an opportunity to topple the ruling regime, Napoleon escaped the island and hastily returned to France. He quickly seized back control and rallied the French people. However, once again, France would find herself back at war with the powers of Europe. Napoleon's only hope at defeating the alliances was to defeat them all separately. Napoleon wasted no time and took to the field to face an army under the command of Wellington at the Battle of Waterloo. Napoleon failed to defeat the British in time, and they were reinforced by the Prussians, dealing a decisive blow to Napoleon. Napoleon again was defeated and exiled, this time to St. Helena in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Napoleon died on the island in 1821. Today, Napoleon remains one of the most famous men in history. Few have had such an impact on the course of global events more than Napoleon. The reforms he would introduce continue to have wide-reaching consequences for generations to come. One of his most significant accomplishments was the Napoleonic Code, which streamlined the French legal system and continues to form the foundation of French civil law to this day. This legal code is used in the United States, most of Asia, and Europe. Before the war, Napoleon was considered a hero of the French Revolution and of the people, but many would argue his actions in the years that followed were akin to the other dictators of Europe like Hitler and Stalin. What do you think? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel.